Princess Velith Sorani had always known she would be sacrificed for her people, but she never imagined the sacrifice would come in the form of marriage to a human. The Atheran Dominion was ancient and proud, a civilization that had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and Velith belonged to its royal bloodline, which meant her life had never truly been her own. People stood 7 feet tall with silver skin that shimmered like moonlight on water, and their eyes were like fractured amethysts that could see spectrums of light that other species could not even imagine. And they lived for centuries, gathering wisdom and power with each passing decade. But the humans had changed everything. They had appeared from a small blue world at the edge of the galaxy only 200 years ago. And at first the Dominion had laughed at them because they were so small and so short-lived. With their fragile bodies and their brief little lives that burned out in less than a century, nobody was laughing anymore. The war had lasted 30 years. And in that time, the humans had taken more territory from the Dominion than any enemy in recorded history. Not through superior technology or greater numbers, but through sheer relentless aggression that the Atherans could not match or understand. When a human soldier died, 10 more seemed to take their place, and they fought with a desperate fury that made no sense to a species that lived for hundreds of years, because why would anyone fight so hard when they had so little time to lose? The peace treaty had been humiliating but necessary, and it contained many clauses about trade routes and demilitarized zones and prisoner exchanges. But the final clause was the one that had sealed Velith's fate, a symbolic union between the royal house of the Dominion and a human representative would cement the peace and show both species that coexistence was possible. Velith had prepared herself for a monster. She had studied human war footage and seen what they could do. And she had read reports of battles where human soldiers had charged into certain death with smiles on their faces. And she had expected her new husband to be some scarred giant who had burned Atheran worlds and bathed in the blood of her people. Instead, she met Captain Marcus Coley, was waiting for her in the ceremonial chamber on the neutral station where the wedding would take place. And when Velith first saw him, she almost laughed because he was so incredibly ordinary by Atheran standards. He was tiny, standing only 5 feet and 11 inches tall, which meant Velith towered over him by more than a foot. And his skin was a warm brown color that looked almost fragile compared to Atheran silver. And his hair was dark and cut short in a practical military style, but his eyes made her pause. They were brown like wet earth after rain, and they held a calmness that seemed out of place on a member of a species known for chaos and violence. And when he looked at her, there was no hunger or triumph or cruelty in his gaze. There was only kindness. And somehow that was worse. The ceremony was brief and formal, conducted by officials from both species who clearly wanted to finish as quickly as possible. And when it was done, Velith found herself alone with her new husband in quarters that would serve as their home on the station. She expected him to make demands or assert dominance or do any of the things she had been warned human males might do. Instead, he sat down across from her and spoke in heavily accented Atheran that he had clearly been practicing. "I know this is not what either of us wanted," Marcus said, and his voice was quiet and sincere. "And I will not pretend that it is anything other than a political arrangement forced upon us both." Velith said nothing because she did not know what response he expected. "But I want you to know something," he continued, "and I want you to believe it even though you have no reason to trust me yet. I will never hurt you, and I will never ask you to be something you are not. And I will spend however long this marriage lasts trying to be worthy of the sacrifice you have made for peace." She did not believe him because humans were liars and killers, and everyone knew this. But she nodded politely and retreated to her private chamber to plan how she would survive this nightmare. Days passed, and then weeks. And Marcus did not change. He did not raise his voice or make unreasonable demands. And he gave her space when she needed it and company when she seemed lonely. And he asked her questions about Atheran culture with what seemed like genuine curiosity rather than tactical interest. Learned her language with impossible speed, becoming fluent in 2 months when most species took years to master Atheran's complex tonal system. And when she asked him how he had learned so fast, he simply shrugged and said he had always been good with languages. He cooked strange earth dishes in their small kitchen and laughed warmly when she found them too spicy. And he told her stories about his homeworld that made it sound beautiful and strange, full of blue oceans and green forests and cities that sparkled with light at night. He slept on a small couch in the common room without complaint, never once suggesting that they share a bed. And he always wished her good rest. With that same calm smile, Valith began to watch him more carefully. Not out of fear anymore, but out of confusion. Because nothing about Marcus Cole matched what she had been taught about humans. Started joining him for meals and asking her own questions about Earth and its people. And she found herself laughing at his jokes, even when they did not translate well. And she noticed that her heart's beat faster when he smiled at her 3 months into their marriage. Realized something terrifying. She was beginning to care for him. She was beginning to wonder if perhaps the Dominion had misunderstood humanity entirely. If perhaps there was more to this strange short-lived species than violence and conquest. She was right about that. But not in the way she imagined, and the truth would prove far more frightening than anything she had prepared herself for. 6 months after the wedding, Valith and Marcus were transferred to a border world called Kalos, where they would serve as symbols of the new peace between their species. The planet was beautiful in a wild way, with purple forests and silver mountains and twin suns that painted the sky in colors Valith had never seen before. And the colony there held both humans and Atherans, living side by side for the first time in history, Valith told herself. She was happy about the transfer because it gave her more space and more freedom. But the truth was that she had grown comfortable with Marcus and did not want to leave their small quarters on the station. She had stopped thinking of him as her captor or her burden. And somewhere along the way he had become something else entirely. Something she did not have a word for yet, but Kath Varos changed things because Kath Varos was where Valith started noticing the cracks in her husband's mask, again with small things that she might have overlooked if she had not been paying such close attention. Marcus woke before dawn every single day without fail, and he would leave their new home and return an hour later with controlled breathing and a thin layer of sweat on his skin. And when she asked what he was doing, he would smile and say he was just taking walks to enjoy the morning. But Valith had seen soldiers train before, and she recognized the rhythm of his breathing and the way he moved afterward, loose and warm like a predator that had just finished stretching its muscles. His reflexes were wrong too, far too fast for an ordinary human. And she noticed it first when a glass slipped from the counter, and he caught it without looking, his hand moving in a blur that her eyes could barely follow. And when he saw her staring, he laughed and said it was just luck. A datapad fell from a shelf one evening, and he snatched it from the air with the same impossible speed. And this time, he did not bother making excuses because he knew she had seen read military reports in her language faster than native Atheran speakers could manage, scrolling through dense tactical documents in minutes and somehow retaining everything. And when officers asked his opinion, he gave answers that revealed a deep understanding of warfare that no simple logistics captain should possess. Valith asked him one quiet evening what he had done before becoming a diplomat, and his smile did not reach his eyes when he answered, "Logistics," he said. And the word sounded like a door closing. The other humans on Kath Varos treated Marcus strangely, and Valith noticed this too because she had become very good at watching and remembering Junior Officers who technically outranked him would salute first when they passed him in corridors. And hardened soldiers who had fought in the worst battles of the war would go quiet when he entered a room, their eyes tracking him with something that looked almost like fear. A celebration was held 3 months after their arrival to mark Unity Day, the anniversary of the peace treaty. And humans and Atherans gathered together to drink and dance and pretend they had not been killing each other. Just a year before, Volith was standing near the refreshment table when a human sergeant approached her, and she could smell alcohol on his breath and see the glaze in his eyes that said he had been drinking heavily. He was old for a human, with gray hair and deep scars on his face and hands that had clearly seen decades of combat. And he gripped her arm with surprising strength and leaned close. "You do not know," he whispered, and his voice was rough with emotion, "what you married, princess. And I pray to whatever gods exist that you never find out." Before Valith could respond, the sergeant stumbled away into the crowd. And when she looked for Marcus, she found him watching from across the room with an expression she could not read. That night she began her research in earnest. She was Atheran royalty, which meant she had access to resources and connections that ordinary citizens did not. And she used every one of them to dig into the past of Captain Marcus Cole. The results were disturbing. His name returned nothing in any database she could access. No service record, and no birthplace, and no family history, and no educational background. As if he had simply appeared from nowhere, fully formed. A man without a past was a man who had been erased. And only certain kinds of people got erased from official records. She dug deeper using back channels and old favors and contacts in Atheran intelligence. And what she found was not information but absence. Great yawning gaps in the records. Where her husband should have been, one contact warned her to stop. Looking, another simply refused to speak with her again after she mentioned the name. Marcus Cole III sent her a single message that contained only 4 words. "Some doors stay closed." Valith confronted him on a night when the twin moons hung low and full over the colony, casting everything in pale silver light that made the world look like a dream. "Who are you?" she asked. And her voice was steady, even though her hearts were pounding. "And I want the truth this time. Not logistics, not walks, not luck, but the real truth about who I married." Marcus was silent for a long moment. And in that silence, Valith saw something shift behind his eyes. Some wall that had been standing for years, developing the faintest crack. "I am the man who chose peace," he finally said. And his voice was heavy with exhaustion. "And that is who I want to be now. The man who learns languages and cooks spicy food and tries to make his wife smile. That is not an answer. It is the only answer I can give you," he said. "Because the other answers are dark and bloody, and I do not want them to touch you." He reached out and took her hand gently, and his skin was warm against hers. "Please," he whispered. "Let it be enough." Valith wanted to push harder because she deserved to know the truth about the man she was building a life with. But something in his eyes stopped her. Some deep and terrible sadness that made her chest ache before she could decide what to do next. A sound split the night air that made them both freeze, alarms, loud and urgent, wailing across the entire colony, and then the sky lit up with fire as enemy ships began their descent. The Vorith hegemony had been watching and waiting for decades, lurking at the edges of known space like patient predators. And they had chosen this moment to strike because the Atheran-human war had left both species weakened and bleeding. They were a locust species that consumed everything in their path, standing 8 feet tall with bodies covered in black chitin armor that grew naturally from their flesh. And they had mandibles that could crush bone and claws that could tear through metal. And they bred so fast that their armies seemed endless. 12 carrier groups dropped out of faster-than-light travel in orbit above Kathvaros. And before the colony's defenses could even power up, 200,000 Vorith ground troops were already falling toward the surface in drop pods that screamed through the atmosphere like burning meteors. The colony garrison numbered only 3,000 soldiers, a mix of humans and Atherans who had been stationed there for peacekeeping rather than warfare. And they were hopelessly and completely outmatched. Communications were jammed within minutes as Vorith signal disruptors blanketed the planet, cutting off any hope of calling for reinforcements from either the Dominion or Earth's fleets. The VAs Vorith commander broadcast a message that every being on the planet could hear, and his voice was a horrible clicking sound that the translators rendered into cold words: surrender and serve the hegemony as slaves, or be harvested for biomass, the message said. You have 1 hour to decide. Valith had been trained from childhood to face death with dignity, and she had always known that her royal status made her a target. So she was not afraid as she watched the enemy ships darken the sky. She was only sad that she had not had more time with Marcus. Sad that she had not told him the things that had been growing in her hearts. Sad that whatever they might have become would now never have the chance to exist. But when she turned to say goodbye to her husband, she found him already moving with a purpose she had never seen before. He walked to a storage unit in the corner of their quarters and pressed his palm against a panel that Valith had always assumed was just decoration. And the panel slid aside to reveal a hidden compartment that should not have existed inside. It was a case made of some material that seemed to drink in light. And Marcus opened it with hands that were steady, and Sura Valith's breath caught in her throat. Inside the case was armor, but not like any armor she had ever seen. Matte black and form-fitting and covered in strange script that seemed to shift and move when she tried to look directly at it. Almost like the writing itself was alive. Marcus began putting on the armor piece by piece, and each component locked into place with a soft mechanical click that sounded final and absolute. And as he dressed, Valith watched him transform from the gentle man she knew into something else entirely. His posture changed, becoming straighter and more predatory, and his movements became precise in a way that spoke of training so intense it had been burned into his very bones when he was fully armored. He reached back into the case and pulled out a weapon that made Valith take a step backward. It was a blade about 2 feet long, simple in design but somehow terrifying, and it hummed with a frequency she could feel in her teeth. And the edge of it seemed too thin to exist, as if reality itself had been sharpened to a killing point. Stay in the bunker beneath the garrison command center, Marcus said, and his voice was different now, colder and flatter, as if the warmth had been drained out of it. The Vorith will not reach you there. Valith could not believe what she was hearing. You cannot be serious, she said, and her voice came out higher than she intended. There are 200,000 of them out there, Marcus, and you are one man. He turned to look at her, and she saw that his eyes had changed. The warm brown was still there, but something else looked out from behind it now. Something ancient and terrible and patient. Something that had seen death so many times it no longer held any fear or meaning. I have faced worse odds, he said. And the words were not a boast, but a simple statement of fact. He moved toward the door and then stopped. And for a moment the coldness in his eyes flickered, and she saw her husband again. The man who made her laugh and learned her language and gave her space to breathe. Valith, he said softly. Whatever you see tonight, whatever you hear about what I do, please remember that I chose peace, and I chose you. And everything I am about to do is because I cannot lose either. Then he was gone, walking out into the chaos of a world under invasion. One small human in black armor against an army of monsters. Valith ran to the bunker as he had instructed, pushing through panicked colonists and frightened soldiers. And she found a place near the command station where officers were frantically trying to organize some kind of defense. The main screen showed a tactical map of the colony, And Valeth watched the red dots representing Vorath forces spread across it like a plague. Thousands upon thousands of enemies moving toward the civilian sectors, and then she saw something that made no sense. A single blue dot was moving toward the enemy lines. Not away from them. Moving fast and steady and completely alone. Someone asked who that was, and an officer checked the identifier and went pale. That signal is registered to Captain Marcus Cole. The officer said, "Diplomatic Corps." Nervous laughter rippled through the bunker, because surely this was a mistake. Surely no diplomat would walk alone into the teeth of an invasion force. The blue dot reached the first wave of red dots, and then the red dots started disappearing one at first. Then 3, then 10, then dozens, blinking out of existence so fast that the tactical computer could not keep up. And the officers staring at the screen began to whisper prayers in a language Valeth did not know someone patched in a drone feed and threw it onto the main screen. And Valeth saw her husband for the first time as he truly was. Marcus moved through the Vorath like wind through leaves. His black armor turning aside plasma bolts that should have killed him instantly. His blade cutting through chitin armor that was supposed to be impenetrable. He did not fight like a man, he fought like a force of nature. Like a storm that had been given form and purpose. And everywhere he moved, the Vorath died in. Numbers that should have been impossible. Of Valeth watched with her hands pressed against her mouth as the gentle man who cooked her spicy food became something out of a nightmare. And she finally understood why that old sergeant had warned her to pray. She never found out what she had married. The Vorath commanders had studied humans extensively before launching their invasion because they were careful predators who believed in knowing their prey. They knew that humans were strong for their size and that they healed quickly and that they could survive injuries that would kill most species. And they knew that humans were creative and stubborn and capable of fighting long past the point when any rational being would surrender. They had planned for human resistance and brought overwhelming numbers specifically to crush any hope of victory before it could form. They had not planned for Marcus Colby dawn of the first day. The forward operating bases that the Vorath had established in the purple forests around the colony had gone silent, and scouts sent to investigate did not return. And the commanders began receiving reports that made no sense. A single enemy combatant was moving through their lines. The reports said, killing everything in his path with a speed and efficiency that defied explanation by noon of that first day. The Vorath commander had lost contact with over 30,000 of his troops, and drone footage showed fields of dead soldiers stretching for miles, their bodies cut apart by wounds that were almost surgical in their precision. By nightfall, the remaining Vorath had pulled back to their landing zones, abandoning their advance entirely to fortified defensive positions against an enemy they could not see and could not stop in the bunker beneath the garrison command center. Valeth watched the tactical display with growing horror as the blue dot that was her husband moved across the map like a brush, painting death across a canvas. Officers from both species gathered around the screens, unable to look away from the impossible thing they were witnessing. Someone obtained footage from Vorath helmet cameras, recordings taken from soldiers who had encountered Marcus before they died. And when it was played on the main screen, the bunker fell absolutely silent. The footage showed Marcus walking through a Vorath encampment in the pre-dawn darkness, his black armor making him nearly invisible in the shadows. And as Valeth watched, he killed 400 soldiers in 11 minutes without taking a single wound. He did not waste a single movement or a single breath. Every strike of his blade found a vital point. Every dodge avoided an attack by exactly the margin needed. Every step carried him to the next enemy at exactly the right angle for maximum efficiency. Artillery position tried to target him, and he simply walked through the explosions as if they were rain, his armor deflecting shrapnel and flame alike. And when he reached the gunners, they died so quickly they probably never even saw what killed Theomavarth. Heavy assault vehicle moved to intercept him. An armored transport designed to survive anti-tank weapons. And Marcus reached it and punched through the reinforced hull with his bare, gaunted hands, and tore the vehicle apart from the inside. Footage ended when the soldier whose camera had captured it was killed, with a single thrust through the throat. An Atherin general who had spent 200 years fighting the Dominion's wars stood in the bunker with his silver face pale and his hands trembling. "What did you send?" He asked the human officers in the room, his voice barely above a whisper. "What in the name of all our ancestors did humanity send us for a peace treaty?" The human ambassador was present in the bunker, a middle-aged woman who had been stationed on Kethvaros to oversee diplomatic relations. And when she answered, her voice was hollow. "We sent you one of the quiet ones," she said. And the words seemed to cost her something. A blacklist operative. One of perhaps 30 that exist in all of human space. What does that mean? The general demanded. The ambassador closed her eyes. "It means he is deployed to places that need to disappear," she said. "Entire planets, entire civilizations, wiped from existence so thoroughly that no record of them remains. And that is what he did for 40 years before he requested transfer to the diplomatic corps." The bunker was silent, except for the soft hum of equipment and the distant sounds of battle. "Why would you make such a creature into a diplomat?" an Atherin colonel asked, and there was genuine bewilderment in his voice. "We did not make him anything," the ambassador replied. "He requested the assignment himself, and when a blacklist operative makes a request, you do not say no. And he said he wanted to prove that humans could be more than monsters." She opened her eyes and looked at the tactical display where the blue dot was methodically eliminating. Another cluster of red. "God help us. All if he has changed his mind," she whispered. Campaign lasted 18 days. Marcus did not stop moving for the entire duration except for brief periods when he would return to the bunker perimeter and sit alone in the darkness. For an hour before rising and walking back into the killing fields, Velith tried to speak to him during one of these rest periods, approaching carefully the way one might approach a wounded predator. But he looked up at her with eyes that held nothing but exhaustion and grief, as she could not find words. He killed through day and night and through rain and shine, moving across the map with a relentlessness that seemed inhuman because it was. Because whatever training had created him had burned away the parts of a person that needed rest or mercy or hope. On the 18th day, the Vorath fleet retreated from orbit and the surviving ground forces attempted emergency evacuation. But Marcus reached their landing zones first, and very few of them made it off the planet alive. The final count was 112,000 Vorath dead. Over 40,000 of them had been killed by a single human. Velith stood at the edge of the colony's defensive perimeter on the morning after the retreat, watching the sun rise over forests that were now graveyards. And she waited because she knew he would come. He emerged from the tree line as the first light touched the purple leaves, his black armor scarred, indented, and covered in ichor that was already drying to a dark crust. And he walked toward her slowly, each step heavy with a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. He stopped 10 feet away and looked at her. And behind the blood and grime, she could still see the brown eyes of the man who had learned her language and cooked her spicy food. "I am sorry," he said, and his voice was raw. "I am sorry you had to see what I am." Velith did not run. She did not scream or call for guards or do any of the things a sensible person would do when confronted with a monster who had just killed 40,000 enemies single-handedly. Instead, she took a step toward him, because somewhere beneath the blood and death, she could still see her husband. Velith took another step toward her husband, and then another, closing the distance between them while the morning sun painted the world in shades of gold. And Purple Marcus stood perfectly still as she approached, and she could see the tension in his shoulders and the way his hands hung empty at his sides as if he was afraid to move. Afraid that any action might shatter whatever fragile thing was happening between them. She stopped an arm's length away and looked up into his face, past the alien blood and the exhaustion and the grief, searching for something she was not sure she would find. "You are afraid of me now," he said. And it was not a question, but a statement of fact. The resigned words of a man who had watched people fear him his entire life. "I watched you kill an army," Valeth replied, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Yes, you lied about who you were. I admitted," he said, and there was a ghost of dark humor in his voice. There is a difference between lying and simply not speaking the truth. That is what liars always say. Marcus let out a breath that might have been a laugh in another life. "You are right," he admitted, "and you deserve better than word games." He reached up slowly and removed his helmet, and beneath it his face was drawn and pale, with shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and a weight that had been crushing him for decades. "I have done terrible things," he said. "Things that would make this invasion look like a border skirmish in comparison. And I have killed millions of beings across dozens of worlds. And I have ended entire civilizations that the Dominion has never even heard of because they were erased so completely that no record remains." Valeth felt her heart clench, but she did not step back. "I was made to be a weapon," Marcus continued, "trained from childhood to kill without hesitation or remorse. And for 40 years, I did exactly that, because I did not know there was any other way to exist." "What changed?" He looked at her with those tired brown eyes, and something soft flickered in them. Something that looked almost like hope. "I got tired," he said simply. "Tired of blood and death and the emptiness that came after every mission. And I started to wonder if I could be something else. Something more than just a monster in human skin." He stepped closer, slowly, giving her every chance to retreat. "I requested the diplomatic assignment because I wanted to prove something. Not to the galaxy, but to myself. And I wanted to believe that humans could be gentle as well as strong. That we could build things instead of only destroying them. And then they gave you a wife," Valeth said. "And then they gave me you," Marcus agreed. "And you were not what I expected either. Not a pampered princess or a political puppet, but a person with thoughts and feelings and a life that had been sacrificed for peace, just like mine." He reached out and took her hand, his gaunted fingers gentle despite the death they had dealt. "I did not fall in love with you because it was part of my mission," he said. "And I did not learn your language or cook you food or give you space because I was ordered to. And everything I have done since we married has been real. The only real thing I have ever had." Valeth looked down at their joined hands, his armored and hers silver-skinned, and she thought about the past 6 months, about all the small kindnesses and quiet moments they had shared. She thought about the man who had never raised his voice and never made demands, and never once treated her as anything less than an equal, and she thought about what she had seen on the tactical displays and in the helmet footage. The terrible efficiency of a weapon that had somehow learned to love. "Show me," she said quietly. "Show me that the man I married is still inside the monster." Marcus released her hand and began removing his gauntlet, the black material sliding away to reveal the skin beneath, and his hand was just a hand. Scarred and calloused and utterly human, he held it out to her, palm up. An offering and a question. Valeth looked at that hand and saw both things it represented, the gentle husband and the brutal killer. The man who cooked spicy food and the weapon who had ended civilizations. She reached out and took it. "I am still afraid," she admitted. "But I think I would rather be afraid with you than safe with anyone else." Marcus made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. And then he pulled her into an embrace that was careful and desperate, and full of something neither of them had words for yet. Years passed, and the galaxy changed around them. The Battle of Kethvaros became legendary, a story told in military academies and diplomatic summits and quiet conversations between species who had once considered humans to be simple and short-lived. Velith took her husband's name and became Ambassador Velith Cole, and together they traveled to a dozen worlds as representatives of the alliance that had grown from the ashes of the Atheran-human war everywhere they went. She told the same story to anyone who would listen. Do not mistake human kindness for weakness, she would say to delegations from species considering aggression, because they sent their most dangerous killer to make peace with my people, a weapon capable of destroying worlds. And he nearly exterminated an entire invasion force because they threatened his wife. She would pause then, letting the words settle. Imagine what they would do if you threatened their children. She would continue, or their homeworld, or their future. Usually the delegations would grow very quiet at this point. The humans are not the galaxy's greatest warriors, Velith would say. And they are not the smartest or the longest lived or the most technologically advanced. But they are something more dangerous than any of those things. She would smile then. A smile that had a sharp edge to it. They are the galaxy's gentlest monsters, she would finish. And if you love them, they will move stars for you and reshape the universe to keep you safe. But if you harm them, and here she would stop speaking, because her husband would step out of whatever shadow he had been waiting in, and he would be smiling that same calm smile he had worn on the day they met. And the delegations would see his brown eyes and his ordinary human face, and they would understand that the kindness was real, and the love was real, and the peace was real, but the monster was real too, waiting just beneath the surface, patient and eternal, and absolutely willing to burn everything if that was what protecting his family required. The delegations always chose peace after that, and somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, the other quiet ones heard the stories about their brother who had found something worth more than death. And some of them began to wonder if perhaps they could find such things too. But that is another story for another time, for now it is enough to know that Velith and Marcus lived the rest of their days together, and that he taught her to appreciate spicy food, and she taught him that being loved did not require being useful, and that they were happy in the way that two broken things can be happy when they find that their jagged edges fit together perfectly. And if sometimes Velith would wake in the night to find her husband standing at the window, staring out at the stars with ancient eyes, she would simply go to him and take his hand and remind him with her presence that he was more than what he had been made to be, had chosen peace, he had chosen her, and that had made all the difference.